The VFW hall smelled like burnt coffee and lemon oil, the kind they use to rub into old wood so it shines under fluorescent lights. I stood in my dress blues with the polished Marine Corps emblem catching the glare. My father, Richard Harris, had just slapped the table and announced to anyone who would listen that I ought to step up like a real man and pay for my stepkids' college. Folks from Lancaster turned their chairs to watch church people, bowling league friends, a few men in Vietnam caps. Dad was grinning like he'd cornered me. "You're a colonel now, Mike," he said, voice loud enough to reach the kitchen. "You can cover it. It's the least you can do for family." I looked him in the eye, the same hazel he gave me, and the same eyes that watched me load a duffel into his truck years back when he was done being my father. My words came out plain, not angry, not loud, just final, like a door gently closing. I don't fund families that are not mine. Chairs creaked. Someone set down a plastic cup. Dad's grin slid off like grease in cold water. That was the moment the whole town learned what I already knew. Some debts are paid only by the man who made them. I was born in Lancaster, Ohio, where Friday night means football at Fulton Field, and Saturday morning means pancakes if you've got $5. My mother, Evelyn, kept a neat house that smelled like Tide and cinnamon candles. My father worked at a machine shop off the bypass, came home with metal shavings in the cuff of his jeans, and said a boy needed to toughen up the way bolts bite into steel. When I was 10, he started calling me soldier, in a tone that felt more dare than affection. He'd toss me the push mower and say, "2 passes around the yard before your cartoons." I'd mow while locusts buzzed and the little flag on our mailbox clicked in the wind. At night, the freight trains moaned past the edge of town. The sound felt like a promise leaving without me. Mom would sneak me a grilled cheese and ask about school. She loved everything small folded laundry notes on the fridge cardinals against snow. She had a laugh like a soft hiccup and a habit of patting my arm when she passed me in the kitchen. When money was tight, she stretched hamburger into chili and called it game day soup, so it felt like a choice. Dad wasn't cruel every day. He showed me how to change oil, how to swing a hammer without tearing the wood. On good Saturdays, we'd stop at the hardware store, and he'd let me dig through the bins of loose nails, the mixed metal smell catching in the back of my throat. But he carried storms in him, quick and mean. When the machine shop cut hours, the storms got closer together. By junior year, the house felt like a hallway, with doors we didn't open. Dad started staying late at the Moose Lodge. He met a woman named Carol, who had 3 kids, 2 boys with thick necks, and a girl who wouldn't meet your eyes. Carol laughed at Dad's stories. He liked the sound of that. He began coming home with cologne that wasn't his. Mom pressed her lips together and kept folding laundry. She had a way of tucking pain into small squares and setting it out of sight. One night after church, rain hammering the roof of our parked car, she said the words, quiet as a psalm. "Your father's moving out." She held the steering wheel at 10 and 2 like she was bracing for impact. I nodded, because what else do you do with a wreck already finished? Dad remarried fast. The pictures went up on Facebook before the divorce papers were dry, him in a gray suit, Carol in a dress the color of iced tea. They looked like people who had finally found the right music. At the reception, he put his arm around those kids and called them his. I saw it all from a library computer and clicked the window closed. He called me 2 weeks later. "Listen, soldier," he said, cheery, like nothing hard had ever happened. "You're 18. Time to figure yourself out. Carol and the kids need space. I'll help you move your stuff to your mom's." That Saturday, he backed his truck into our driveway and handed me garbage bags instead of boxes. We didn't say much. The baseball trophies went in with my jeans. "Don't make this uglier than it has to be," he said. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just carried the bags to the truck while our neighbor's flag clacked against its pole. At Mom's duplex off Fair Avenue, she had made a bed on the couch with clean sheets that smelled like sunshine from the line. She put a pot of coffee on, even though it was past 9. Dad set the last bag down and gave the room a quick look, like he was already late for somewhere else. "This is for the best," he said, and he meant for him. When he left the door, latch sounded too loud. Mom touched my shoulder. "We'll be fine," she said. "I know how to be poor. We've practiced." We both let out a small laugh, the kind you use to keep from breaking. I got a job bussing tables at Bob Evans. I learned the rhythm of plates and orders, the way pancakes hiss when they hit a hot griddle. After shifts, I walked past the stadium lights, blazing the smell of cut grass, rising damp and sweet. The marching band carried on like it always had. I felt at once older than 19 and younger than 10. Some nights the anger came on like weather. I'd picture Dad teaching Carol's boys to hang drywall, hear him cheering from their bleachers. I'd see his hand heavy on some kid's shoulder, the way it had never been on mine. The anger didn't make me brave, but it kept the room warm when the heat clicked off. A recruiter set up a table in our gym one day, right under the faded Falcon mural. Staff Sergeant Ortega had a voice that filled a room without shouting. He didn't promise glory. He said, "You want a roof. 3 meals a job that makes sense when you lay your head down." He slid a pamphlet across the table, the Marine Corps emblem bright, like something that couldn't be scratched. "You want respect, earn it." That night, I told Mom I was thinking about it. She poured 2 cups of instant coffee, the good kind a church friend had given her. "Your grandfather served in Korea," she said. "Said the thing about the service is you always know where you stand. If you do this, don't do it to spite your father. Do it for you." She reached across the table, took my hand, and squeezed once the way she did when she wanted me anchored. I slept on the idea for a week, like you sleep on a sore tooth, tonguing it, testing the pain, seeing if it changed shape. It didn't. I signed the papers on a Thursday. In May, the sky so clear, it looked washed. I didn't tell Dad. I didn't need to. I didn't tell Dad when I signed, but word travels quick in a town where you can cross Main Street in 3 strides. 2 days after the recruiter swore me in, I got a voicemail from him during my shift at Bob Evans. Clatter of plates, a waitress calling hash browns, walking, and his voice in my pocket saying, "So you're running off to play soldier." Figures. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't ask when I shipped. He ended with, "You chose your path. Don't come crawling back." I listened twice, then deleted it. The phone felt heavier for a while, like a wrench in my apron. The night before I left, Mom made meatloaf with Ritz cracker crumbs and a ketchup glaze. She set the cheap candles out like it was Thanksgiving and used the good mismatched plates she kept from her mother. The duplex was hot because the air conditioner rattled and gave up, so she opened the kitchen window and let the cicadas fill the spaces between our words. "You packed socks?" she asked. 6 pairs. Your Bible. In the side pocket. I didn't read much, but I liked the thin pages and the sound of her voice when she quoted anything. She passed me a folded card with a $50 bill tucked inside. "From church," she said. "Pastor Ron took up a little collection. He didn't make a big deal. He just set the coffee can at the back. Folks put in what they could." The card had a bald eagle and a flag on it and the words, "We're proud of you," in block gold. I tried not to look as surprised as I felt. I pictured old Mrs. Greeley from the choir, her hands always cold when she shook yours, putting 2 wrinkled singles in that can. I pictured the Smalls who had lost their boy in Iraq pushing a 20 through the slot. A lump formed in my throat that spaghetti sauce couldn't loosen. Mom and I washed dishes by hand. The TV in the other room murmured about weather, scattered thunderstorms, chance of hail, and some high school scores ran along the bottom. She dried plates slowly, like she was stalling time with a towel. "You don't have to be brave with me," she said. "I'm not," I told her. "I'm just decided." We sat on the couch, and she took my hand and prayed not big church words, just "Lord, keep my boy. Give him good friends and clear eyes." When she finished, she kissed my knuckles like I was still little and had skinned them on gravel. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Ortega, picked me up at 6 the next morning in a government sedan with fast food napkins stuffed in the door pocket. He tapped the horn twice polite. Mom hugged me hard enough to push air out of my ribs, then took a breath like she was going underwater. "Call when you can," she said. "Write when you can't." The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky had that pale seam along the horizon, like someone had unzipped the night. The town smelled like wet pavement and bakery yeast. We passed the machine shop where Dad worked. The overhead light above the side door burned yellow. A figure smoked by the dumpster shoulders, hunched against a day not yet started. I looked away before I could decide if it was him. MEPS in Columbus felt like standing in line inside a fluorescent tube. There were tighten-your-belt men watching everything clipboards and laminated signs that said, "No phones and keep your papers ready." We peed in cups, duck-walked in a circle, and answered questions to strangers about our bodies and our histories. A kid from Zanesville fainted in the hallway, and the nurse, bored and kind at the same time, said happens every day and gave him orange juice. At lunch, Ortega bought us chicken tenders in a food court that smelled like every mall I'd ever been in. He talked without preaching. "You'll think you made a mistake the first week," he told us. "That's normal. Keep your head down, learn the names of your squad, and you'll be fine. If you've got a mother who prays, count that as a weapon." That night, the hotel was a chain off the interstate with a broken ice machine and a breakfast bar under a plastic sneeze guard. In my room, I laid my folded clothes on the second bed and put my pamphlets under the lamp like a night watch. I dialed Mom and told her about the orange juice, the kid who fainted, the way the doctors wore the same shoes as my high school principal. She listened like it was a baseball game on the radio, and every detail mattered. When we hung up, I stared at the ceiling and thought about Dad at the Moose Lodge, making a joke at my expense, and then I let the thought go, because it wasn't a weight I could carry where I was going. We shipped before sunrise. The bus hummed with the soft panic of men trying not to be boys. Someone in the back whispered a prayer to St. Michael, and someone up front blew into his hands like it would warm more than his fingers. I watched the fields unspool into trees and then into the flat gray ribbon of highway. At a rest stop in West Virginia, I fed quarters into a vending machine for a Dr. Pepper that tasted like metal and winter. A payphone? Yes, an actual payphone hung by the men's room, and for a second, I pictured myself calling Dad. In my mind, he picked up on the fourth ring and said, well, in a way that meant, "What do you want from me?" I stood there long enough for the machine to eat my second quarter. I let it keep the third and walked out. South Carolina air hit me like a damp towel when we stepped off the bus near Paris Island. Pines lined the road in sharp rows, and the sky felt lower, like it had settled on our shoulders to see what we would do. The first thing we met was the voice, big, trained, not just loud, but strategic. "Get off my bus," the drill instructor shouted, and the words cracked like a board. The yellow footprints waited on the pavement, bright as bananas, perfect in rank and file. The DI pointed like a conductor, and we shuffled into place, toes to the paint heels, touching shoulders, squared. It felt ceremonial and ridiculous and holy all at once, like a wedding where you can't see the bride yet, but you know everything's about to change. I heard in my head Dad's voice from that voicemail, "You chose your path." Good. It kept my chin level. I thought of Mom's prayer. It settled over my shoulders like the towel she used to wrap me in after a bath. The DI moved down the line, a storm in a hat, and shouted inches from a kid's face. The kid said, "Yes, sir," and the DI barked, "I work for a living, don't call me sir," and the kid corrected himself to yes. Staff sergeant, and the world he knew shrank to the size of the yellow paint under his boots. We learned how to hold our fingers, where to put our eyes, how to answer with speed, like it mattered, which it did. A gnat landed on my cheek, and I willed it to find another man to bother. Sweat traced my spine in a perfect line. The brim of the DI's campaign cover cut the sky into a hard black semicircle. He talked about rules like he was reading from a family Bible. What you could be late for nothing. What you could forget nothing. What you could think nothing, at least for now. As we marched not beautifully, not yet toward the intake building, I let myself think one thought. Being cast out is one thing. Stepping in is another. Dad had thrown me to the edges of his new life like a broken tool, and I had gone to the edges of a new world by choice. There was power in that quiet and stubborn. It didn't erase the hurt, but it drew a line under it with a ruler. The intake doors whooshed open. A blast of cold air hit us. Someone coughed. Someone smiled, quick like a secret. I didn't smile. I breathed. Eyes front, the DI barked, and we answered as one. The payphone on arrival looked like a museum piece, but it worked. I read the script into Mom's answering machine. "I have arrived safely at Paris Island. Do not send food. You will receive further instructions by mail, while a drill instructor paced behind us like a storm deciding where to land. The receiver smelled like coins and disinfectant. 100 calls ended at once, a clatter like a lid closing on the life I'd brought with me. They shaved us to the same head-issued duffels that could have swallowed a second recruit and handed us a stack of knowledge we were somehow supposed to memorize before we slept, which we didn't. The squad bay smelled like pine cleaner, damp socks and nerves. We made racks so tight a quarter had to bounce. When it didn't, the quarterdeck did push-ups, mountain climbers burpees until the floor sweated with us. My senior drill instructor was Staff Sergeant Powell, a barrel of a man with a voice that didn't crack so much as file metal. "You are supposed to be miserable," he said the first week, almost kindly. "Misery focuses the mind." Another DI, Sergeant Mays, moved like a rumor there, and gone and somehow right behind you when your boot heel drifted off the line. Their hats cut the light into hard crescents. Their timing was perfect and merciless. We learned fast, because slow made you famous. We recited general orders until the sentences bent into music. We drilled with rifles until my shoulders ticked like metronomes in my sleep. The chow hall was steam and clamshells, spooned eggs and coffee you drank because it was there. Outside sand fleas found the strip of skin at your neck with sniper accuracy. You stood still because you were told to. The bite burned and then didn't. Discipline is a better salve than ointment. Mail call was church. A letter from Mom came nearly every Tuesday, even when the postmark said otherwise. She wrote about weather and church suppers and the way the light hit the maple by the duplex. She tucked in bulletin clippings, "Pray for Mike Harris serving our country," and I hid them in my green knowledge book so no one would see what they meant. One week she sent a photo of herself on the stoop with a pumpkin pie, hair curled, that stubborn little smile she used when life tried to boss her around. I kept it folded small in my wallet, a private flag. Rifle week is when the world clicked. The M16A4 settled into my shoulder like a tool I'd been born to hold. At 500 yards, the target looked like a rumor. Sergeant Mays crouched beside me, voice low. Sight picture. Slow your heart on the exhale. A lazy wind lifted the grass in a sheet the color of old money. I let breath slip out. Felt the trigger wall pressed. The paper snapped. The spotter called a hit. It wasn't joy exactly. It was relief, the sense of something finally making sense. We crawled under wire, learned to buddy rush, without tripping over ourselves, and rolled for EMIC map until my elbows were scabbed like a kid's again. At night, the bay went gray-blue and quiet. Firewatch walked the center aisle in sock feet, the red lens smearing a slow circle across lockers. I took my hour and thought about Dad, only as long as it took to remember I had work he couldn't touch. My world had rules now. They were hard, but they were honest. The crucible came like a storm with a date. 50-some miles on blistered feet, tasks that turned grown men into kids, shaking a locked door, meals measured in heat tabs, and minutes you didn't have. We humped ammo cans and a telephone pole we named Bertha because she didn't care about your feelings. At 3 a.m, fog sat on the ground like something alive, and we moved through it in a thin line that felt like both a target and a prayer. Harper, a recruit from Kentucky, went wobbly at a creek crossing. I took his pack for a mile without asking and handed it back when his legs came home. He didn't thank me. He just stayed with the line. That's thanks enough. By the last day, we were mud to the teeth, eyes, grainy voices sanded down. At dawn, the air tasted like pennies. We formed on the parade deck, filthy and new. The DI's voices came softer, as if someone had turned down a knob. Staff Sergeant Powell walked the line with a small black box. He stopped before each of us looked into our eyes, like checking a lock, and pressed an insignia into our palm, the eagle globe and anchor, warm from the walk. "You've earned this," he said. "Don't spend it cheap." I closed my fist and felt edges bite skin. The ache felt holy. The warrior's breakfast tasted like holiday food cooked by angels and eaten by wolves. Eggs, sausage pancakes the size of hubcaps. We laughed with our mouths full because talking took too long. Someone asked what I'd do first with Liberty. "Call my mother," I said, and the table went quiet in a good way. Harper nodded like it was the right answer on a test we all hoped to pass. Graduation came a week later. The bleachers shone with sunglasses and programs and pride. Mom wore a blue dress that matched the October sky and held herself like a woman who had saved something for this day. Beside her sat Earl, a Vietnam vet from church with a mustache like winter grass. He lifted 2 fingers when our eyes met. The announcer called us new Marines, and the words settled on my shoulders like rank I hadn't earned yet, but promised to grow into. After the ceremony, Mom touched the EGA pinned above my heart as if it were breathing. "It suits you," she said. We took pictures by the Globe statue. A toddler with a flag ran in circles until his mother scooped him up, laughing and crying at once. Earl shook my hand. "Welcome to the club you never stop being in," he said. His palm was dry, his eyes were wet. Pride has a texture older men recognize. I scanned the crowd out of habit and didn't see my father. I didn't expect to. What I felt wasn't disappointment so much as clean air. Absence can be a gift if you stop setting a place for it. Mom and I ate fried shrimp at a place near the gate, and she told me my grandfather would have liked this day. We didn't talk about Dad. We didn't need to. Orders came for School of Infantry at Camp Geiger. On the bus, North Pines flicked past like metronomes, marking the beat of a new life. Harper dozed, mouth open, in a kid's sleep. I wrote Mom a letter on a clipboard in my lap, told her about the hymn crackling on the busted speaker and the way the EGA felt heavier than it looked. I told her I'd be careful, and that careful meant smart, and smart meant listening, and listening meant living. At Geiger, instructors measured every mistake with the same tape. I wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but I could count on my hands in the dark, remember the plan, when adrenaline erased it, and get quiet, when quiet was the only thing that kept men alive. A gunny named McHenry watched me square away a private who was 2 bad choices from NJP. After he said, "Harris, you keep doing that and you'll wear bars one day." I heard it like a note pinned inside my cover, some future I didn't dare say out loud. When Weekend Liberty finally came, I walked to the USO, wrote postcards to the church kids who'd mailed me crayon flags, and ate a donut that tasted like a small parade. I dialed Mom from another old payphone and told her what I would tell her across years. "I'm good. I'm tired. I'm proud. Don't worry more than you have to." I didn't call Dad. There are things a man can't hear if he hasn't earned the right to listen. The road ahead felt straight, even where it bent, training to unit to field to whatever came next. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I was moving toward something with my name on it. The fleet runs on clocks and coffee. At Camp Lejeune, Reveille slid under the blinds at 0500 and the barracks stairs rang with boots. My first unit taught me the rhythm field, Chow Armory Field again. In the heat, the pine pitch went sweet and sticky. In the cold, the rifle metal kissed your cheekbone like a dare. I learned leaders' names the way a man learns weather, who blew hot, who carried rain, who steadied you when the sky went loud. I was enlisted then, a squad leader with a voice that reached the last man without needing to be mean. A captain named Lawson stopped me one afternoon after I'd walked a private back from the edge of his temper. "You've got the tone that makes people straighten," he said, like he'd noticed a left-handedness. I hadn't. A week later, the gunny slid a packet across his desk. "Me, Sep," he said. "If you want it, take the shot." The Marine Enlisted Commissioning Education Program was a door I hadn't let myself imagine. I took it. I finished a degree at Ohio State while wearing a uniform that meant I saluted on the walk to class and studied late with a thermos of bad coffee. Mom mailed me Buckeyes she'd rolled herself and wrote, "Proud of you, son, but don't forget to eat a vegetable." I kept her notes in a shoebox like savings. The day the acceptance to OCS came, I sat in the campus library and felt the air move different around my head, like somebody had opened a window. Quantico smelled like swamp and bleach. At OCS, I learned the Quigley's water. Tastes like a question, and the answer is, keep moving. At the basic school, I learned a map is a kind of prayer if you hold it right. I got blisters where I didn't know you could blister. I also learned I could carry men through mud by talking about little things. What letter you'd write home that night, how the chow hall's chili never improved, but you could doctor it with hot sauce packets. Leading wasn't drama. It was repetition and noticing. On commissioning day, A retired colonel named Wilkes read my orders. The silver bars gleamed like a thing borrowed from someone else's life. Mom pinned them with fingers that shook. "You look like your grandfather," she whispered. There was an empty space to my left where a father might have stood. The wind filled it with flags. I didn't dwell. Absence had taught me how to stand up without a wall. The Corps sent me back to Lejeune as a second lieutenant and then a first. My Marines watched how I handled a bad radio and a worse day. I learned to ask more than I told, to listen to the man who knew the motor pool like a family tree. In the field, nights smelled like damp canvas and gun oil. At dawn, we stood for colors and watched the flag climb into a sky that didn't promise anything but light. Deployments came and went, desert heat that baked your thoughts into single words, sea salt that chewed at gear mountains that kept their own time. We lost a corporal to an IED on a road that didn't look dangerous until it explained itself. I wrote the letter home because I had to, because he was mine. I walked the platoon's anger down from shouting to stand quiet and promised them only what I could. We'd keep each other upright and honest. The promise held most days. It had to. Captains become majors if they don't mess up, and if a handful of people sign pieces of paper, and if the work you did when nobody watched decides to keep vouching for you. I wore a gold oak leaf one spring while the azaleas flared in base housing like someone had lit the shrubs. I took command of a company and found out command is a different kind of lonely, respectful distance, closed doors, decisions that taste like pennies. I called Mom Sunday evenings and told her small things. A kid from Tennessee played mandolin at the unit cookout. The new chaplain had a laugh like marbles. She told me about Frost on the church steps, about Mrs. Greeley sitting in the front pew with a blanket and humming harmony under every hymn. There were men who made a point of asking me about my father because small towns stick to you like burrs. I said, "We're not close," which is Ohio for not at all. Word came now and then that Dad bragged on his stepkids at the Moose Lodge, that he said Mike's doing fine for himself in a tone that meant he'd decided the story ended there. I let it pass like a truck in the next lane. My life was long days measured in training schedules, and a little joy when a young sergeant found his legs and started walking like a man who knew where he was going. Somewhere in there I married, and somewhere later I didn't. The Corps eats hours. Marriage needs them. We parted without a war. I kept a photograph in the top drawer for a while, then put it in the shoebox with Mom's notes. Work stayed steady. A general I respected tapped his knuckle on my fitness report one year and said, "You don't waste people." It read like the best award I'd ever get. Lieutenant Colonel came with a heavier key ring and a quieter voice. I had a battalion for a hot minute that taught me the Corps is a living thing with moods and needs and an appetite for clear orders. I wrote too many condolence letters and too many letters of thanks. I watched a Lance Corporal from Michigan finish his GED in a break room at 0300, and I watched a Staff Sergeant from Texas learn to forgive a second lieutenant who hadn't earned it yet. The day I realized I had become the man other men watched in the field, I went for a run until my lungs scratched, then called Mom and asked about her tomatoes. Colonel is a bird that lands rarely and never by accident. The day the list came out, my sergeant major walked in without knocking, grinning like a kid who'd found $1. "Sir, the eagle's perched," he said, and set the printout on my desk. The room didn't spin, but it breathed. I sat back, thought of the yellow footprints and the Quigley, and the first time I told a private to drink water, like it was a plan. I thought of Gunny McHenry saying, "You keep doing that and you'll wear bars one day." I thought of Dad calling me soldier, like a joke. I didn't think about pay. I thought about responsibility, like a sack of grain you shoulder, because someone has to get it to the barn before the rain. The pin-on ceremony was at Lejeune, in a hall that had seen everybody's rise and retirement. Polished floors, flags, in stands, a podium with a mic that always made first sentences sound like they'd missed breakfast. Mom sat in the front row in a cream sweater and the string of fake pearls she wore to weddings and funerals and promotions that felt like both. The band warmed up in the corner brass, murmuring like bees. The general read the orders. The words are always the same. They still feel like a surprise. Mom and my sergeant major pinned the eagles. Mom's fingers were steady this time. She looked up at me and whispered, "You look taller." And I said, "The floor's honest." And she laughed her soft, hiccup laugh. After Marines lined up and shook my hand. A corporal with a scar like a quarter moon above his eyebrow said, "Proud to serve under you, sir," and I filed it next to the general's comment about not wasting people. Public Affairs posted a photo me at the podium. Mom in profile, those silver birds catching light like they were about to fly. It made the base website, then the Facebook page for the local paper, and then somehow the Lancaster Community Board where folks share lost dogs and boil water advisories. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go. A friend from high school texted a screenshot and 3 words your dad saw. I stared at the image until the screen went dark and my face looked back. That evening, I walked the catwalk behind the barracks as the sun flamed out behind the pines. The air smelled like cut grass and warm tar. Marines laughed 2 stories below about something that happened in the motor pool. I called Mom. She said the church ladies had printed the photo and taped it to the fellowship hall fridge with a magnet shaped like a rooster. "You buying dinner when you come home?" she said. "I'm buying too," I told her. We didn't mention Dad. Silence can be a boundary you choose. In the morning, I ran with the staff at 05:30, the cadence easy and the world pinking up. After colors, I stood with a mug of terrible coffee on the stoop and watched the base wake flag climbing trucks, coughing to life, a private scuffing his heel because a stitch of lace wouldn't tuck. My phone buzzed again. Lancaster area code. I pocketed it and sipped. Some calls you answer on your terms, or you don't answer at all. Word had found my father the way Word finds everybody in a town like ours, with a screenshot, with a "did you hear?" with a bartender wiping the same spot and saying, "Well, I'll be." It would take him 2 days to decide whether pride or need should lead. I knew which would win. I was ready either way. I flew into Columbus on a gray Friday and drove a rental Chevy up Route 33 with the heater huffing like an old dog. Plows had pushed snow into long, crusted berms that made the highway look like a paper cut. Lancaster rose out of fields, the color of wet cardboard water tower church spires, the courthouse clock I could draw blindfolded. The radio listed school closings for counties we weren't in. January in Ohio likes to repeat itself. Mom had taped a note to her door. "Come in chilly on the stove." The duplex smelled like cumin and clean laundry. She hugged me in the kitchen and then held me at arm's length like she was measuring where the years went. "You look good," she said. Lean, which in her mouth meant healthy. I set my ruck by the coat tree and hung up my cover. We ate at the small table, chili cornbread and the church lady's idea of salad, which is mostly marshmallows. Mom asked about the unit like she knew everyone's rank by feel. I asked about church and whether the furnace behaved. "It stutters," she said. "But so do I." And she laughed, that soft, hiccup laugh. After supper, I fixed the wobbly faucet and tightened cabinet hinges. Ordinary repairs calm a man. You can make a screw stop complaining. That night, an unknown number buzzed my phone. I let it go to voicemail, then listened by the sink where the window filmed with cold. Mike. "It's your old man," he began like he'd been in the room the whole time. "Heard the news. Big deal. Thought we might talk. Got some things with the kids' college and whatnot. Call me. No congratulations. No, how's your mother? Just the ramp toward the ask." I didn't call back. I slept on the couch even though my old room was made up because it faces the window where the streetlight halos the maple and the freight train's horn threads the night. That sound keeps your bones steady. In the morning, frost feathered the inside edges of the glass. I scraped it with a library card until the world came clear. He showed up the next afternoon right after I'd shoveled the walk for Mom and Mrs. Esposito. I heard the truck before I saw it. The engine needed a belt, and then there he was. On the stoop, hair thinner jaw, working like he was chewing old gristle. He grinned too wide. "Soldier," he said like that joke had never aged. Or I should say, Colonel. Mom wiped her hands on a dish towel and stepped back to give us space without going far. Dad took the kitchen chair. He made small talk that clattered to the floor. Whether the Buckeyes' chances, then cleared his throat and looked at a spot over my shoulder like he was aiming. "Look," he said. "Tyler got into Ohio State. Brett's talking trade school. Kayla wants nursing at Hawking. You know how it is. Bills stack up like snow. He lifted his hands, palms out. You're doing well. You could help. Be a man. Step up for this family. The kitchen clock ticked like a metronome. I could see the scar near his thumb where a grinder nicked him when I was 12. I remembered garbage bags instead of boxes. I kept my voice easy. Those aren't my kids, I said. And I do step up for my family. You're my family, he shot back quick like a card he'd been saving. Blood is blood. Blood is biology, I said. Family is who shows up. You made your choice. His jaw worked. He looked past me at Mom, who was rinsing cups that didn't need rinsing. Evelyn, he said as if she were a judge, tell him what's right. Mom set a cup upside down on the rack and dried her hands slow. What's right, she said, is men taking care of the messes they make. She didn't look at him when she said it. Dad pushed back from the table. The chair legs squealed on linoleum. He smiled again, smaller. No need to get dramatic, he said. Tell you what, we're having a little thing at the VFW Saturday. Folks would love to clap you on the back. You stop by, we'll talk then. More room to think. Room meant audience. He wanted the blessing of a crowd on his ask, the leverage of public shaming if I said no. I felt the old teenage heat crawl up my neck and then ebb like a spent wave. I'll be there, I said. His eyebrows flicked, surprised. I'd agreed, surprised and pleased at the same time. After he left, Mom put on water for tea, because that's what you do when feelings threaten to knock things off shelves. You don't owe him a nickel, she said. I know, I said, but I owe this town a clear sentence. She smiled. You always did like your sentences straight. She patted my wrist. Be kind if you can. Be clear either way. Saturday came brittle cold, the kind that makes your teeth ache if you breathe wrong. I took Mom to get new tires, then drove her home and stacked salt near the steps. The sun stayed pale and low. I pressed my blues, set my cover on the table, and sat a minute with my hands on my knees until the room quit thinking for me. I could feel the VFW hall without being in it, the lemon oil, the burn of old coffee, the flags on the west wall, the mic that makes first sentences stumble. I wasn't going to grandstand. Before I left, Mom touched the back of my hand. Say what you mean, she said. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. I learned that from you, I told her. Outside the cold bit my lungs. The sky had the pale look of evening, though it wasn't 4 yet. I started the Chevy and watched the exhaust make ghosts in the alley. Somewhere a train blew long and low. The town listened. The VFW sat low and square by the fairgrounds, American and POW MIA flags, leaning into the wind like they were listening. Inside smelled like lemon oil, and burnt coffee, a comfort you don't have to like for it to work. A whiteboard near the door listed Friday fish fry bingo at 7 and a raffle for a meat bundle donated by Hocking Valley Meats. Vietnam caps dotted the room like blackbirds. Someone had hung a banner that said, "Welcome home, call Harris." The letter spaced just enough to look careful. Dad was already holding court near the bar. Carol at his elbow, stepkids orbiting like loose screws. He wore a clean flannel and the smile he kept for crowds. When he saw me, he lifted his hand like I was a topic he'd been meaning to get to. Conversations thinned. Pastor Ron was talking to Earl by the coffee urn. They both nodded at me in that small-town way that means we're here if you need us, and also if you don't. Look who it is, Dad boomed, and the mic made his first word, hiccup. My boy the Colonel. He clapped like an auctioneer, encouraging bids. A few folks clapped too, because clapping is what you do when you don't know the script. He gestured at a table up front. Come on, son, say a few words. Folks want to hear from a hero. Hero is a word best kept for men who didn't come home. I took my cover off, tucked it under my arm, and walked up slow. The floor had been waxed to a shine that kept the lights busy. Dad touched my shoulder like we were a team, then pivoted to the crowd. Now, he said before Mike takes the mic, I just want to say how proud we are. You all know my kids. Tyler OSU bound, Brett honest tradesman in the making, Kayla heart set on nursing. College is no small change these days. He chuckled, practiced and thin. But you do what you have to for family, right? He turned to me, the smile tightening. And I know my son the colonel will step up like a real man and help his brother and sister out. Carol folded her arms chin high. Tyler and Brett stood behind her, big and restless eyes daring and darting at once. Kayla looked at the floor like it could save her from a choice she hadn't made yet. The VFW went quiet, the way a field goes quiet when the wind changes. Somewhere in the back, the pinball machine blinked without sound. Dad raised the mic to my mouth as if handing me a shovel to fill his hole. "Go on!" he said, close enough for coffee and aftershave to mix into something that smelled like my childhood, ordinary and sharp. I took the mic. It had that old metal taste like you get on a battery. "Thanks for being here," I said. "This hall means something to me. Men I respect built their lives around rooms like this." A murmur of agreement moved along the back wall. "And since we're all here, I'll keep this simple." Dad stood 3 feet away, grinning, waiting for his pitch to become my checkbook. I could see the scar near his thumb, where the grinder bit him the story he loved to tell about, toughing it out with duct tape and a rag. I felt the rookie's nerves flutter low in my belly and let them pass like weather. "You're a colonel now," Dad said into the side of the mic. Too close, like he couldn't stop helping. "Say you'll do the right thing." I turned and faced him fully, the hazel eyes, the old man's regret he didn't recognize, the practiced charm that always needed an audience. I spoke without heat, the way you read a rule you didn't write, but believe in. "Richard," I said, "I don't call many people by their first name if I can help it, but I needed the distance. When I was 18, you loaded my life into garbage bags and told me I wasn't part of your family. You made your choices. I made mine." A chair creaked. Someone set down a plastic cup. I could hear Pastor Ron's breath steady and close. Dad's grin flickered. "Come on," he said, voice turning the corner. "That was a long time ago. Blood's blood." "Blood's biology," I said. "Family is who shows up." He stepped forward, chin out. "Be a man. Step up." I looked him in the eye. The same eyes I'd looked into from the passenger seat of his truck the night he dropped my bags at Mom's duplex, and let the words come out plain. Not angry, not loud, just true. "I don't fund families that are not mine." The sentence fell into the room and landed like a tool with the right weight. It didn't bounce. For a heartbeat, nothing moved except the American flag in the heater's breath. Then the room exhaled all at once. Someone in the back said, "Well, the way old men say a period." Dad's face went tight around the mouth the way men's faces go when they've miscounted change in public. "You ungrateful," he started, then stopped because the word didn't have enough space to land without making him smaller. He switched to wounded. "After all I did." Earl shifted his cap higher on his head and spoke without standing. "We all make our beds. Richard," he said, "some of us even sleep in 'em." Carol's eyes went hard as pulled wire. "It's the Christian thing," she said loud enough for Pastor Ron to hear. "Helping your own." Pastor Ron took his time. "I preach charity every Sunday," he said, "and accountability every other one." Kayla's voice surprised the room by being in it. "I can get loans," she said, "and work." She looked at me then away, and I saw a girl trying to be a woman in a hurry. Tyler puffed his chest. "You got money," he said. "What's it to you?" Brett nodded like a backup dancer who didn't know the song. "It's this," I said, turning. So the room got all of me, and not just the part that answered. I helped the people who held me up when I had nothing: my mother, my church, this town. I'll give to the scholarship fund at the high school because kids here work hard and could use a hand. But I won't pay the tab a grown man ran up and wants to slide my way. I let that sit. It didn't need applause. It needed air. Dad tried one more angle, small and mean. "You owe me respect," he said. "Respect is something you give forward," I answered. "You don't collect it with interest." He reached for bluster and found it empty. The mic cable brushed his boot. He stepped back like it had bitten him. Carol shifted, calculating the next room she could win. The boys went eyes down in that way men do when the fight they trained for turns into math they can't solve. An old Marine I didn't know, square as a toolbox, lifted 2 fingers from his table. "Semper Fi, Colonel," he said, and it was not a cheer, but a witness. A few veterans echoed it under their breath, the words moving like a low tide along the wall. I handed the mic to the MC. "Thanks for the coffee," I said, because someone had made it, and that mattered. I turned to Dad. "You can call me when you want to talk about anything that doesn't start with my wallet." I put my cover on and walked toward the door, each step quiet, the waxed floor reflecting a man I recognized. Hands touched my sleeve as I passed Earl, Pastor Ron, Mrs. Greeley with her blanket over her knees. Outside, cold hit like truth. The flags cracked once, and then settled. My breath lifted in small ghosts and blew away. I heard the door open behind me and close gently, like a room remembering how to be a room after a storm has moved on. I sat in the Chevy a minute and watched my hands on the wheel. They looked like work and like peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, thumbs up emoji, a thing she'd learned from the choir ladies. I let out a laugh and felt something unclench in my ribs, like a knot that had done its job finally letting go. When I pulled onto the road, the courthouse clock struck the hour. The sound carried down Main the way it always had. The town went on being itself good, stubborn, ordinary. I went on being mine. Sunday morning, I woke before the furnace kicked on, and the house made its little settling noises the way an old woman clears her throat before the hymn. Mom's percolator burbled on the back burner. I fried bacon in a cast iron pan that had outlived 3 toasters and a marriage. When she walked in hairpinned cardigan, buttoned wrong at the top like always, she touched my shoulder, then the place above my heart where the EGA would sit if I were in uniform. "You said it plain," she told me. "I tried to say it kind," I said. "That too," she said, and poured 2 mugs. "Kind and plain can share a cup." We went to the early service. The sanctuary smelled like lemon polish and winter coats. Pastor Ron didn't preach about me or anybody else in that hall. He preached about sowing in season and not eating what belongs to next year. After the benediction, folks lined the aisle the way they do for funerals and weddings, and the day the youth choir mangles "How Great Thou Art." Earl shook my hand, squeezed once. Mrs. Greeley patted my cheek with fingers like ice and said, "Good boy," which is what my mother would have said to any stray dog she liked. Nobody asked for details. They just stood near us, which is an old Midwestern language for love. That afternoon, I drove out to the high school. Snow hid in the fence corners. The goalposts lifted pale into the sky like someone praying with their hands up. I sat in the parking lot and wrote a letter on a yellow legal pad, neat block print, all caps, so I couldn't argue with myself later. I pledged a yearly check to a new fund the guidance counselor could award, as she saw fit, the Shows Up Scholarship in honor of my mother, Evelyn, who had kept showing up when it was cold and boring and nobody clapped. The criteria were simple service to others, grit without noise, proof you'd worked a shift when your friends slept. I slid the letter into an envelope with a check and drove it over to the board office, because stamps take too long when you've made up your mind. On Monday, I went with Mom to the bank. The lobby was carpeted in a color named for a river no one swims in. We sat with a woman whose nameplate read, "Karen, NMLS numbers like scripture." I paid off Mom's mortgage with a cashier's check, and the printer spit out a document called Satisfaction of Mortgage, which felt like a phrase big enough to hang over a kitchen table. Mom didn't cry. She folded the paper and put it in her purse like a bread recipe. "You hungry?" she asked on the way out. We split a meatloaf sandwich at the diner and didn't talk about what had or hadn't happened at the VFW. Some victories you don't pick at. In the grocery store lot later that week, I ran into Kayla loading bags into the trunk of a car that had needed a new muffler since last summer. She looked smaller, without Carol flattening the air around her. "I hear you set up a scholarship," she said, eyes on the bread, then on me. "Mrs. Tanner told me." "It's for anybody who keeps going when no one's watching," I said. "If you want nursing, you should apply. And FAFSA isn't a monster if you read the directions." I pulled out my phone, typed the website, showed her. She smiled quick and real. "I'm sorry about," she began, and then stopped, because at 18, you shouldn't have to apologize for your elders. "You take care of you," I said. "Work, study, show up. It adds up." "Thank you," she said like a decision, not a plea. She slid into the driver's seat and drove away without spinning her tires. Dad didn't call for 3 days, which is either restraint or strategy. When he finally left a voicemail, the words came out of him like bad nails crooked unwilling still metal. "Guess you made your point," he said. "Didn't have to embarrass me." He huffed, then added softer. "I was proud of that picture. Should have said so." Click. I listened twice. Pride is a currency that spends better before the bill collector shows up. I didn't return the call. Boundaries aren't punishments. They're fences you build so the garden grows. A day later, a shorter message arrived. I was wrong. I saved that one. Not because I needed it, but because it might be the last true thing he says where I can hear it. On Wednesday, I met Earl at the cemetery, where the veteran stones line up like men who won't sit down until the work's done. The wind came across the field smelling like iron and cold. We set small flags by a row, Sergeant Dawson CPL Ruiz PFC James with mittened hands, and the kind of silence that isn't awkward because it's full of names. Earl talked about a buddy who learned to make biscuits on a pot lid. I told him about Harper and the mile I carried his pack. "We carry each other all the time," Earl said, straightening a flag. "Most days, you just don't know it." Back in town, the VFW posted the fish fry sign for Friday. I showed up at 4 with an apron and a willingness to cut lemon wedges until my fingers stung. The same room that had held a storm now smelled like hot oil and talking. Dad didn't come. Carol did sweeping past the dessert table like she was looking for a fight in a pan of brownies. I worked the line, handed out plates, listened to two old men argue about whether walleye counts as religion. Pastor Ron told me the scholarship would help a kid who stacks pallets at Walmart and still makes orchestra practice. Mom sat with the choir ladies and traded pie recipes like intelligence. I took the long way home past the stadium and the water tower and the machine shop where Dad still parked by the side door. For a second, I pictured walking in, saying a sentence that would solve anything. But people aren't bolts. You don't turn them with a single wrench. I drove on. Before I flew back to Lejeune, I swapped the bald tires for new ones on Mom's Corolla, replaced the porch light with an LED she swore was bright enough to see next week, and left an envelope on the church secretary's desk to cover the youth group's trip to clean up the river come spring. It didn't feel like charity. It felt like rent, what a man owes the street that taught him to walk. On my last night, Mom and I sat at the small table with 2 slices of store-bought pie because hers were all claimed. The furnace clicked on, the maple scratched the window in a friendly way. She reached across and rested her hand on mine. "You did right," she said. "I did necessary," I said. "That's a cousin." "To right," she said, and smiled her stubborn little smile. I slept on the couch again by choice. A train moaned sometime after midnight, long and low, the same sound from when I was a boy. I dreamed of yellow footprints and snow-lined county roads, of men calling cadence and a high school kid in a borrowed tux stepping into a future he can afford. In the morning, frost laced the glass just enough to make the world seem borrowed and returned. At the airport, Mom hugged me hard and then tidied my collar like I was 10 and going to picture day. "Call when you land," she said. "I always do," I told her. On base that evening, the flag dropped down the rope like a prayer turning into a promise. My Marines moved across the parade deck with the kind of purpose you only get from repetition and trust. I stood with a paper cup of coffee that tasted like duty and watched the light drain from the pines. I thought about the sentence I'd spoken in that hall and the 2 I didn't. "You hurt me. I'm okay. Maybe someday. Maybe not. Here is what I know and what I want written on whatever I leave behind. Blood is biology. Family is who shows up. Revenge looks hot in movies, but in real life, it's boundaries and bills paid and the quiet decision to aim your strength where it belongs. I didn't humiliate my father. I just stopped letting him draft my paycheck against my childhood. The town when on my mother's house felt lighter, and a kid I'll never meet will open a letter in May that says, "You've been chosen. Keep going." If this story met you where you live, if it made you think about who showed up for you or who you've been showing up for, share it with someone who'd understand. And if you want more plain, true stories about ordinary Americans holding the line, you're welcome to stick around and subscribe. Thank you for listening.